Jack Dorsey continues to shake things up at Twitter. Square considers him a risk. And Tesla autopilot update rolls out tonight. Tech News Tonight is next.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Tonight, episode 445 for Wednesday, October 14th, 2015. This episode is brought to you by Blue Apron. Blue Apron will send you all of the ingredients to cook fresh, delicious meals with simple step-by-step instructions right to your door. See what's on the menu this week and get your first 2 meals free by going to blueapron.com/twit. That's blueapron.com/twit. Welcome. I am Megan Morrone. After the break, I'll talk to Farhad Manjoo from the New York Times about where startups go to die. But first, let's get to the tech news. Twitter shares were up today on the news that the company has poached former Google Chief Business Officer Omid Kordestani to be Twitter's new executive chairman of the Twitter Board of Directors. After tweeting his company-wide memo announcing layoffs yesterday, CEO Jack Dorsey made a 3-Twitter announcement about Kordestani's hiring for the revamped Twitter board. And in other Jack Dorsey news, payments company Square officially announced their IPO. Square is founded and is currently led by Dorsey. We knew that Square was planning to go public, and we have wondered aloud on this show how Dorsey will lead Twitter while simultaneously ushering Square through its IPO. So far, investors have been bullish on Dorsey, but if you read the fine print on the IPO filing, you'll see that Dorsey's dual duty at Twitter is listed as one of the company's risk factors. Square is losing money as a company, but they still managed to process $23.8 billion in payments last year, according to The Verge. Tesla released an over-the-air update that offers new autonomous driving features to tens of thousands of cars already on the road. Now, anyone with a Tesla from September 2014 on will begin to receive these autopilot updates tonight. Wired.com says that when you have the new autopilot feature turned on, you can rest your hands on your knees, palms up, fingertips touching the wheel. If you take your hands off the wheel, you'll get a message after a minute to put them back on. When you grab the steering wheel, autopilot will automatically turn off, returning control to you, we hope. Auto Steer is a beta feature of autopilot for the Model S and the Model X. It uses a deep learning algorithm that helps keep the driver on the road. At an event today, Tesla CEO Elon Musk said they're telling drivers to keep their hands on the wheel just in case, for now. Hackers can secretly control Siri and Google Now from 16 feet away. In a paper published in the IEEE Spectrum, researchers in France demonstrate the hack by controlling a phone that was inside someone's pocket. If a phone has a pair of headphones plugged into the jack, a smart cybercriminal could potentially use the headphone cord as an antenna to convert electromagnetic waves into electrical signals that make Siri or Google Now think that messages are coming from the microphones in the headphones. The hacker could then send text messages, dial the hacker's phone number to convert the phone into a remote listening device, or use the phone to send spam. Coming up, Farhad Manjoo on gentrified snacks and Steve Jobs. But first, this episode of Tech News Tonight is brought to you by Blue Apron, a company that makes cooking delicious meals easy by delivering fresh, ready-to-cook meals right to your door. For less than $10 per meal, Blue Apron sends you fresh ingredients, perfectly proportioned with step-by-step instructions, including beautifully printed pictures. No trips to the grocery store, and no waste from unused ingredients. Each balanced meal is 500 to 700 calories per serving. Cooking takes half an hour. Shipping is free, and the menus are always new. They will not send the same meal twice. They work around your schedule and dietary preferences, and Blue Apron's experts source only the best seasonal ingredients for incredible meals like seared chicken and autumn vegetables with apple cider mustard jus, or roasted spaghetti squash with marinara sauce and black Cerignola olives. Blue Apron, it's a better way to cook. Check out this week's menu and get your first 2 meals free by going to blueapron.com/twit. That's right, 2 free meals just for going to blueapron.com/twit. And we thank Blue Apron for their support of Tech News Tonight. Our guest tonight is one of the most prolific technology columnists at the New York Times, deftly covering everything from ad blockers to Alphabet. But today, he turned his eye on the cultural importance of snacks at Silicon Valley startups. He writes, just about every company has a refrigerator or 2 stocked with Hint, a subtly flavored brand of bottled water that seems to flow as freely in San Francisco as the tears of the people who were evicted to make room for the incoming software engineers. Farhad Manjoo, thanks for coming back to the show.
Hey, thanks. Good to
That
be
was a
here.
great line, by the way.
Thanks.
And to be fair, your story today isn't really about the snacks. It's more about what happens when startups go under and what they leave behind, namely the uneaten snacks. Tell us about the company you profiled, Leap Transit.
Yeah, so Leap was this, it seemed like a really interesting idea. They were trying to create a bus service, a luxury bus service. Somewhere their sort of big idea was that Uber was a little too expensive for most people to use for a daily commute, but the public buses, Muni is the name of it in San Francisco, they are overcrowded and basically underfunded and not a totally pleasant experience. So they wanted to create sort of a somewhere in the middle product, and they aimed this service. It was $6 per ride, and they aimed this service at tech people, sort of the kind of people who have moved into the city and kind of taken over. They were in operation for a couple months in 2013, and then they took a break, and then they started up again in 2015, and then they kind of went bankrupt a little bit spectacularly because they got a lot of coverage, and most of it was negative coverage, and then they suddenly shut down and were never kind of heard from again.
So why do you think that Leap failed?
I mean, there are a number of reasons. One is most startups fail. I mean, like, you sort of can't discount this idea. In Silicon Valley, we have sort of a success bias. Like, people look at the companies that are successful, and there's this idea that a lot of startups are successful. Most startups are not successful. Like, the vast majority fail. So in some sense, it's not surprising that it failed. This one, I think, failed for a special reason, which was that the idea, I think, itself was a good idea, and there are other competitors that I've heard are successful with this idea. Leap in particular, though, kind of hit on every kind of Silicon Valley tech bro cliche, and in its marketing and in its branding, its sort of identity about itself, and then kind of in the press coverage about it, it kind of just like hit every warning sign about gentrification in San Francisco, and became kind of like an enemy of many people in the city even before it started. And so I think it suggests that when you sort of align yourself very much with kind of like the tech bro culture, you don't really create an inviting brand, that's may have been what did them in.
Right. I mean, that's what you say, like that they had just all these crazy organic, vegan, paleo snacks, the blue bottle coffee, which is something I guess you have to drink if you're starting a startup.
Yeah, it's required. Yeah.
And then you could buy them, with an app. And you say you went and visited these buses, and they had to shut down so quickly. The snacks are still all there, left tied up.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really interesting seeing these buses there. So they were up for auction as part of a bankruptcy auction, and they're now in like this abandoned, this parking lot full of RVs, basically, in the East Bay. And the buses the auction people told me that the buses no longer start, and I'm not really sure why. They don't really work anymore. But other than that, they were mostly intact. Like, all of the leather seats and the USB ports were there, and like all of the cables that were used to power the like onboard infrastructure were there, and the snacks were there. Like, the display case full of the paleo and vegan and non-GMO snacks were still all there. So it was like a little bit of a freaky experience kind of going to these buses, which I imagine actually were kind of as empty as, from what I've heard, they were pretty empty when they were running in service too. So like when they were abandoned, they were probably the same atmosphere.
So now, were they really a hindrance to people? I mean, I kind of read a little bit of how about they blocked Muni stops and they were unpopular. But do you think it was more of the image was unpopular versus they really disrupting the Muni system?
Yeah, so when they first started in 2013, they started operating essentially without any regulation or permission, and what they were doing was they were stopping at city bus stops. And the city bus stops have already kind of been at the center of controversy because a bunch of the tech companies run their own private buses, and they were stopping at city bus stops too. So this was a sort of a private company basing its business on stopping at city bus stops. And so that was, something that people said had caused some infrastructure and inconvenience problems. And then, the other thing they did that really earned them a kind of a bad image was the San Francisco Chronicle reported that the buses that they had bought had originally been wheelchair accessible, and they had agreed in their license to follow federal transit laws, which means that they should have been wheelchair accessible. But it turns out that the company removed the wheelchair ramps from the buses. So it's so that it created like several days of bad press for them, and they really didn't have like a good explanation for why they had done that. So I think I can't tell that there was actually real inconvenience caused for the residents of San Francisco. As far as I know, actually, the buses were only running a few times a day, so it's not like they were all over, and they only had 3 or 4 buses. The real problem was sort of this image that they had come into this an ongoing kind of battle in San Francisco about tech people and about this question of like whether private companies, private bus systems, and transportation systems like Uber are removing money from the public transportation infrastructure. They had come into this and had sort of been very narrow and like blind about the whole story, and just kind of made matters worse, I think.
Well, I also wonder if people weren't using it because they were actually using Uber, like they just couldn't even be bothered to ride on someone else's schedule, but just have enough money to just take Uber to and from work.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of wealthy people in San Francisco, so that's possible. And then the other thing that this came along at around the time that Uber and Lyft had both been starting their carpooling service, so they put multiple people in the car now, and that significantly lowers the cost. So for $6 on this bus, even though it was like kind of luxury and you could use Wi-Fi on it, you may have been able to pay $6 for an Uber, and then it comes to your location and takes you there probably pretty much faster. So so they face competition from the car services too.
So I know Uber has obviously expanded all over the world, but these other on-demand economy startups, the small one, deliver food packages, do your laundry, your unwanted tasks. I mean, have you seen that they really have visions to go everywhere, to go to small towns, or are those little startups really just planning on staying in the big cities, San Francisco, New York?
It depends on the kinds of services there are. I mean, the companies like the delivery companies, they really they are dependent on density. So it's hard to see how they can work in places that, don't have that many people very close together. And that's also true of things like Instacart, the grocery delivery company. They route people through smartphones to stores where they buy stuff and then come to your house to deliver it. That all depends. In order to kind of do a lot of that, they need density. And so it seems like these are made for cities that are not New York. New York sort of already has a lot of these services, but places like San Francisco really, doesn't really have good transportation, didn't really have good like food delivery services before these companies came along. But the problem is that there are now so many of them, especially in San Francisco, and there's so many. So each service has lots of competition, which lowers prices, and then they're sort of different only by branding and not by kind of the actual services they perform. So it's really hard to see how they can be like any one of them can be like a breakout service.
Yeah, and they seem to sort of help paint this picture of millennials living in places like San Francisco where, they just can't even be bothered to do their own laundry or any of their tasks that their mother did when they were living at home. And they're creating all of these companies just to do that. And it's adding to that picture. Now, last week you reviewed the new Steve Jobs movie, and we've all heard that most of the film paints Jobs as the villain. But you say the message of the movie might be that we can overlook his faults because of what he created. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I was surprised because I too had heard that the movie, painted Jobs in a very negative light, and his family and many people from Apple had objected to the portrayal. And it's true, like there are many parts of it. There are many things he does in the movie that don't really like seem like something a nice person would do. But the overall message is really one of like the kind of optimism of people in the tech industry, and by the end of the movie, like there's sort of this affirmation of that optimism and that idea that the people in the tech industry who kind of can see the future and spend time and kind of roll over the present to build it, that those people are worth having in this world. It's really like one of the first movies I've seen, I think, that it really buys into the kind of Silicon Valley vision of the world, which is like the future is important and people need to build it, and like we need to optimistically look forward to it, even at the cost of, you know, kind of personal relationships or other short-term costs of the present. So I really didn't, I mean, it's critical of jobs, but the kind of larger story is one of affirmation of Silicon Valley's worldview.
So what about like this, you know, bro economy that you're talking about that was the downfall of this bus service? I mean, do you think the future might look upon the people changing Silicon Valley now in the same way? Like you say that the tech industry may be people by petty, ruthless, self-important weirdos, but look at the products. Do you think the future might look back at what the generation now is creating and say that it really didn't matter that they were gentrifying San Francisco because they created some amazing things for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible. Like Uber today is regarded as, you know, this company that doesn't have a very good image, and people, you know, question its ethics and its morals all the time. But if you imagine that over time, Uber can succeed in its overall mission of, you know, like just lowering car ownership, increasing the amount of people we put in cars, that will have huge repercussions for things that people care about. You know, the environment, like the amount of money you spend on transportation, the amount of space we dedicate to roads, like the sort of ability of businesses to deliver things more quickly. All this stuff could have like huge changes in the economy, many things for the positive. And then if you think, you know, way in the far out future and you say Uber could be, you know, Uber is funding a self-driving car project. It, along with Google, could, you know, be very important in that way. And if self-driving cars reduce road fatalities by a huge amount, like that could actually save people's lives. Like if all of that happens, if there's sort of overwhelming optimism about the future comes true, we will definitely forget about kind of the short-term scandals and the regulatory battles and like the way they, you know, fought competitors in a very ruthless way. Like we will look at that as the short-term cost for like a long-term bright future. And, you know, it probably will be justified. Like, you know, we look back on inventors now or kind of pioneers, like Henry Ford was not in any way a savory character, but, you know, people admire him and the things he created despite that. And I think that's sort of the long story of invention.
Well, Farhad, thank you so much for joining us. Farhad Manjoo is the technology columnist at the New York Times, at @FManjoo on Twitter. Thanks for coming on.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Take care. Now, we're all familiar with the overwhelming popularity of watching other people play video games on YouTube or dedicated sites like Twitch. But what about people watching novelists write novels? Is that a thing now? If it isn't already, writer Joshua Cohen is trying to make it a thing. If you go to the website pckwck.com, you can not only watch Cohen on his webcam writing a novel, but you can also see the document that he's writing as he's writing it in real time. Unfortunately, it did not allow me to make edits or suggestions, but if you click the text, floating hearts will appear. Cohen's most recent novel, The Book of Numbers, came out earlier this year. It's a story about a fiction writer named Joshua Cohen. And that is it for this edition of Tech News Tonight. If you're interested in watching me write this show at my desk in real time, let me know. I'm actually just curious. I'm never going to do that. But we do post the show on Facebook, so thanks for commenting and participating in our community there. We're also on iTunes, Feedly, Stitcher, TuneIn, YouTube, and I am on Twitter at Megan Morrone. You can also subscribe to the show at twit.tv/TN2. You can write to us at tn2@twit.tv and watch live every weekday at 4 p.m. Pacific. And don't miss our morning news program, Tech News Today. That's every weekday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. I'm Megan Morrone. Thanks for watching.
Bandwidth for Tech News Tonight is brought to you by CashFly.com.